It's about the power of communication, and yet this is totally extemporaneous, which is fine, because I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time on different subjects. But what I wanted to talk about, I believe and totally convinced that technology has created this explosion of ways to communicate. You never know, well, do they do email? Do they do text? Do they do, you know, is it going to be a phone message? Do I have to Skype them? Do I have to Facebook them? Paradoxically, it's created a platform where nobody really knows sometimes what mode of communication. And the primary topic of tonight's communication is that we've lost the power of the human voice. And that's the connection. And the power of the human voice is so underutilized and so undervalued today. Funny, and I'm not making this up for the presentation. I thought, God, this is so apropos and so timely. Somebody emailed me and said, oh, let's have coffee. Scott thinks you and I should connect. Happened to be Scott, Libby, and Gabe. And I thought, okay, I'll reach out to her. Well, she sends me this email, and she's like, you know, she gives me her elevator speech in the email, right? And I'm supposed to give her available dates. That's kind of how the game's played, right? She's like, I'm available Tuesday and Wednesday, and I don't know this lady, but Scott thinks we should meet. So I'm thinking, okay, I trust Scott, we should meet. So after I read her email, I thought, our favorite acronym in our law firm is PUP, stands for pick up the phone. I called her, and she said, wow, you called me. She said, that is so refreshing. And I thought, I love this, because I'm speaking on this tonight. And anyway, we chatted for about 15 minutes, and now when we do meet, you know, we're already in Chapter 5, and in the relationship that we're developing, the referral relationship and everything else, which is really neat, because I just saved a lot of time. Because what we chit-chatted about for 20 minutes is at least we established a rapport, we learned to trust each other, and we heard each other's voice, and now we're more human to each other. But we covered all the introductory, where are you from, how'd you get here, what do you want, how can I help you? All of that preliminary conversation we did in, it probably was no more than 12 minutes on the phone. So when we do finally get together for coffee in a couple of weeks, now we're going to talk business, because we kind of already know each other. Otherwise, we would have spent an hour talking about, you know, kids and family and where we're from and all that. So that's, you know, that's one dynamic of communication I really am firmly convinced that is lost. The one thing I've learned in building my companies, the one practice I built in 2007, this is a short sale practice, but I've also started some other companies as well, is that the power of the voice is so underutilized. And if somebody, and these are the two golden rules, and I'm kind of like really giving you the cut to the chase speech because we don't have a lot of time. But if somebody's upset or if they're confused, you have to pick up the phone. And that's zero tolerance, and there's absolutely no exceptions to that. I hope you agree. And I see so many times the email goes back and forth, and it's like, oh my goodness, just pick up the phone. Because not only are you going to be able to exchange very critical information in order to get to that resolution or meeting of the minds, which we're all attempting to do in these long chains and ad nauseum chains of email communications, we're trying to get that meeting of the minds, right? That magic moment when you finally meet the minds. But the thing is that you can't convey what you're trying to convey in written communication, because you lose 80% of that message, which is your inflection in your voice, your intonations in your voice, your pauses, your silence, and then that fluidity of thought. So when you speak something, somebody answers, that's going to guide you on what your next statement is. Unless, of course, you're one of those that you're so worried about what you're going to say, you don't care about what they say, right? And we all know those. And of course, that segues into the art of listening. And in communication, I think two of the most powerful components in verbal communication is not just the art of listening, but silence. And you have to know when to be silent. And people in today's age, because we're so inundated with information and stimuli and news and beeps and tones and iPhones and iPads and big screen TVs and everything, we feel uncomfortable when it gets silent. And people feel like they have to rush in and fill in that silence. They have to fill that gap in. They have to say something. And then you lose the power of that message that you're trying to convey. So that is huge in communication, is knowing when to be silent and let that person complete their thoughts, and also knowing when to listen. and not being so concerned about what you're going to say next and what your agenda is and what kind of sales pitch you're going to give about what you can do. You mean what you say what you mean. I'm sure you've never heard that before, but I cannot accentuate it enough how valuable that is. Mean what you say and say what you mean, right? And not be so worried about the flowery, vernacular or being verbose or trying to impress, but just mean what you say what you mean, be concise, be succinct. What is your opinion as far as how technology has affected communication overall in terms of the personal touch?
Well, it depends on the age group to a large extent.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, if I text my daughter or son, they'll answer within a millisecond. If I leave them a message, which I'm inclined to do, I may never hear from them again.
And emails you.
And I don't think it's personal. I think I don't know what, they just don't pay attention. So it depends on the age group to a large extent.
True.
The biggest problem I see in any kind of communication, and particularly in email, is how quick it can turn into a confrontive, really bad situation that didn't start out bad.
Good point.
But pretty soon we're exchanging swords, And that may be a personal problem with me, but it's sure a mess.
Well, you miss the.
It's a very good point.
You miss the.
Did I pass?
The attitude. I mean, you can't. I mean, you could say the same thing with different inflections and mean completely. I mean, you can you're either being sarcastic or you're being truthful or you're being, and you don't know which they're being.
Exactly.
So
exactly. So you've had an experience then, Bill, where your communications in writing have been misinterpreted. Has that happened to you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Happens a lot, doesn't it? I have a lot of patience verbally because I'm more relational and much more verbal than I am writing. I'm not a scrivener, and I know that. Don't want to be. That's fine. But in writing, I don't have the patience to convey the message as effectively and as eloquently or as personally as I probably could do. I think I have the intelligence and the wisdom to do that and the skill set, but it takes so long. So why not just pick up the phone and convey that message in 45 seconds or 30 seconds? But I do think that it's so important for all generations, especially somebody who is trying to build a business, who has to convey their credibility and has to establish their trust, their integrity, their persona, their brand. They have to do it personally. And they have to touch, they have to shake hands, they have to make eye contact, and that is so, so important. I found that out in my business. We went to a webinar. And I thought, well, it's going to be a lot easier instead of doing presentations, because I do presentations in my company to groups of realtors. We're just going to do a webinar. It's a lot easier for me. I can sit in my office and drink my coffee and put my feet up on the desk if I wanted to. Nobody would know, and we would just do a webinar. Well, we did that for a couple of months. We didn't get near the response. We didn't get near the response as we did in presentations. Presentations, we had that Q&A. We had that question and answer dialogue. And that fluidity and spontaneity and communication, which is so, so important. And also, it's important to, and this is one thing it's hard to do in writing, practicing humility and conveying confidence. It almost sounds like it's an oxymoron, but it's not. You can practice humility, and practicing humility basically is recognizing the things that you don't do well that you need to outsource, or the things that you perhaps have a weakness in because you just simply don't accentuate that. There's only so many hours in a day, so we have certain skill sets and certain strengths that we want to accentuate. And so humility is confidently realizing and recognizing what our strengths are, and conveying those strengths, and outsourcing those weaknesses. And so you can't do that in written communication. It's absolutely impossible to convey humility and yet practice confidence and conveying that confidence in your messaging. The one thing that I do a lot that's very effective, there's a couple things. And it depends on who I reach. Some people are like, what is this? And then most are like, wow, I love it. Show me how to do this. So there's this little voice app. So if you can't get in front of the person, and logistically and geographically, we can't always do that, or just time-wise, there's a little app, and your kids would love this, and they probably already use it, but it's called a little voice memo. On iPhone, it's automatic. It's there by default. You can send your voice as an attachment in an email or as a text. And what we have in our company is we have a lot of meetings where lots of thoughts and information is gathered in a very quick amount of time, maybe a 30-minute phone conference where there's 6 people involved, and immediately after, what I'll do is I'll summarize that entire conference as far as our strategy or our blueprint, our game plan of entering Chicago. That's something we're doing in our company as we're expanding into Chicago. And do that verbally in a voice memo that's recorded. And that's very, very effective. And something else that we do a lot is that we will leave or send those attachments to our clients. A lot of our clients are very fragile. They are upset because they're in upside-down situations and they're losing their job, or have already lost their job, they're losing their house, they may be losing their marriage, and they're a very, very fragile situation. So we can convey that concern and that compassion verbally, and then we'll send them an email too and say, check your voicemail, so that we don't have to put all that in writing. So once we started really picking up the verbal communication, the voice memo apps, and all the other tools that really capture and preserve our voice instead of written communication, and started conveying and messaging our company to our clients and to our partners and companies that we deal with, our business accelerated and our branding accelerated. And what we're doing is we're personifying our company. Instead of just a website, we do this, and trying to fight through the frenzy because everybody's trying to do the same thing. It's a big frenzy. Then all of a sudden when they think of us, they think of a person. And that's what everybody wants. If they feel like that they can trust that person, they don't hire the company, they hire Tom or they hire Bill. So if you feel that your verbal communications are perhaps not the best, and so email and texting is great, I can see that as definitely a surface, kind of ostensibly a plus, but then again, it doesn't allow you that opportunity or that platform in order to improve those skills. So here you are 5 years later and you're still back here. On the scale from 1 to 10, you're maybe at 3 where you could have been 7, right? Where you could have been practicing those verbal skills. When is it do you jump in and say, this has got to stop, I'm picking up the phone?
If it's a serious thing, I want to talk. If it's, I'll meet you at 5, you know, that's fine.
Yeah, a data bite. I call that like a data bite.
If it's at all serious, I want.
Or if they're upset.
Yeah, or if there's a chance they'll be upset.
Yeah, yeah. And there is, the beauty of it, what I like about it, is preserving the verbal communication can also be a partner with technology, just like that voice app that I'm talking about. You can use technology to capture the human voice. And I firmly believe that most companies are not doing that enough. And I think if they capture that human voice, and not just the YouTube and the video, but just the human voice alone. It doesn't have to be the profile or the bobbing talking head, but the actual human voice. I'm going to go ahead and try to go through order priority, and that would be the art of listening. And not being so worried about what you're going to say next, which so many people are, and just being remiss about what that person just said. You know, you're so worried, we are so worried about our elevator speech, right? And having to get our 5 bullet points out, that we don't really care what that person just said because we got to spit the next thing out that's on our elevator speech. We can't be robots. We have to listen to that person, and that verbal communication has to be fluid like water. So depending on what they just said, you need to customize and cater your response. The other one is when to be silent. And I said this before you came in. This is so important. We all feel awkward when there's silence, and we feel like we have to fill in that void, because we have so much stimulus and stimuli in our environment, and all of a sudden there's silence. We just made a point, for example. Perfect example. You make a point. You have to know when to shut up and when to be quiet. And that is so powerful. Silence can be more powerful than words. In fact, oftentimes it is, when it's strategically timed and depending on the context of the communication. The other would be authentic, and a lot of people can convey that. They can convey that with intonations and inflections and the tone of voice. Authenticity can be conveyed with humility, self-deprecation. If you want to, you know, poke fun of yourself a little bit. I get a lot of attorney jokes, of course. I love attorney jokes. Actually, I think they're all funny. So I always invite those. And I think that shows authenticity, that you're authentic and you're confident enough to take those jokes that make fun of the attorney profession. And I just laugh with them and ask them for more. So, you know, I think to be authentic, that's extremely important. But most of all is to listen and not be so concerned about what you're going to say next. When to be silent, be friendly. This is something I said that these two gentlemen loved, and this is mean what you say and say what you mean.
Oh, yeah.
So really think about what you want to say and get to the point. And don't use a lot of superlatives and a lot of, sometimes we get in these prefatory phrases that are so secondary or irrelevant to the message because you're trying to sound like a professor of English or something, and it's kind of silly. People appreciate people who are concise and who make a point and they're succinct and they say what they mean and mean what they say. And I think that's extremely powerful. If you want somebody to trust you, ask them for a favor. That is the epitome of humility. You need them. And so you can convey confidence with your body language, your posture, your poise, your voice, the way you use your voice, your eye contact, but you can practice humility at the same time. And that conveys somebody who other people are going to be attracted to, they're going to trust them, and trust is what it's all about. If they don't trust you, they're not going to hand over whatever you're wanting them to hand over to you, which is business. My takeaway with this presentation is that business owners, in particular business owners, in particular entrepreneurs, they have to start using the power of the human voice more than what they are. They're not going to be able to penetrate the frenzy, and it is a frenzy out there, isn't it? It's a total frenzy. They're not going to be able to penetrate that frenzy or distinguish themselves without involving their persona. And the only way to inject their persona and who they are is with the power of the human voice. And it is so underutilized, but they have to know how to use it effectively. And the other two things is that the two golden rules, if somebody is upset or if they're confused, those are the two magic words. If they're ever upset, and everybody's going to know when somebody's upset, either at you or a situation or a circumstance, or they're confused, you have to pick up the phone or you have to meet with them personally. There are no exceptions. You are not going to be able to accomplish anything in writing if they're upset or confused.